Well, today, the top 25 things Tony Joe has taught me about cars over the past 20 plus years. Today, we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for the special Car Corner edition of Prudent Money. Good afternoon and welcome to the Prudent Money Radio Show. I'm your host, Bob Brooks. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Well, today we're not taking questions and doing the format for the special Car Corner edition of Prudent Money a little bit differently today. Tony Joe called me up this morning and said, there's just absolutely no way that I can make it over there today. And I don't think that people realize that every Friday, Tony Joe stops what he's doing in his shop, hops in the car, drives over to my office and studio to do a program with me. And some of the things that people don't realize is that Tony Joe shows up about 10 to 15 till 3, and it's from there that we actually plan the show. Now, you may be going, boy, so that's the reason it's so bad. But that's it. It's the blessing of the relationship that I've got with Tony Joe that we're able to really put together some things that we know will help people. And that's where his heart comes from and why he devotes the amount of time he does to coming here on a Friday afternoon. And we do have a lot of fun doing the program together. It's just there's often times where I'll have a ton of things to talk about, which he and I will talk about just briefly before the program, and we may not even get down to only the first item because we got off on some kind of a tangent talking about something other than what we were going to focus on. So I'm kind of telling you the behind the scenes. But many people don't know the story of how the car edition, the Friday car edition, actually came about. Don Spear was a voice of financial stewardship and financial education for decades in the DFW area. And Lord brought us together. And back in 2002, I took over his program when he decided to retire. January of 2002. It's hard to believe that it's been that long. Prior to me taking over the program, he and Tony Joe, I think for 10 years, had been doing a Friday show. It all came from a conversation that Tony Joe had at his shop with Don, who used to bring his car to him. And Don said to him one day, "Hey, Tony Joe, I would love for you to come on the radio." And from there, that's when it started becoming a every Friday deal. Now, for a good 5, 6, 7 years, Tony Joe had to drive all the way to the radio station studio, which was a very long hike. And he faithfully did that for a very long time. Then I think Don ended up with a studio in his office, and Tony Joe would just go there. But Tony Joe's been doing this for a long time, and it's been such a blessing. I mean, people want to know, or I gotten the question, why you do a financial talk show, and why do a special Car Corner edition that's just totally unrelated. But you see, they're really not unrelated. We oftentimes talk about the parallels between what I do for a living and what he does for a living. And believe it or not, there's a lot of parallels about working with somebody that's going to be giving you recommendations on things that you had know nothing about. I mean, when it comes to cars, I know very little about it. And it's something that I have to trust somebody. And I think that we forget that just randomly going into a car repair shop, not having a relationship, you do take a little bit of a risk. Because, and not to stereotype repair shops, it's just that in every business, when you're asking for advice and to get something fixed and to figure out what's wrong with your car, or for whatever the situation is, you are trusting that advice is in your best interest. And it's just been such a blessing to see Tony Joe come in and just really from the heart, and of course that's the way he runs his shop, and really help people. And it's always, probably not, I'm probably numb to it at this point. for the longest time, I was always amazed how people would call in with complicated situations they've taken to all kinds of mechanics, and he has nothing in front of him but a a pad of paper that he writes notes down on when someone calls in. So he does everything right off the top of his head, and he is very confident when he gives those answers. So what a blessing he's been to the community. And so this morning, he called me and said, "Man," he goes, "I'm just backed up." So instead of going and pulling an old pre-recorded show, I thought, what would be cool is make a list of 25 of the things that Tony Joe's taught me about cars. And believe it or not, a lot of what we've talked about through the years really has stuck with me. But it's also just emphasized with me how important it is to have a mechanic on your team. And when I say a team, I mean the people who advise you and help you stay on the right road. No pun intended. From a mechanic to a financial advisor to a CPA, you name it. I mean, it's so very important that if you're trusting advice that's being given to you, that you can trust the person giving the advice. So what I wanted to do was go through some of these were just off the top of my head, but I think they're just really great pieces of advice. First one I'll start with: if the estimate is $500 or more, and he always uses the $500 as a benchmark, get a second opinion. And Tony Joe's real big on second opinions because he has seen what happens when you get a high repair bill, and then that high repair bill gets higher, and you're already in up to your neck in repair bills, and you're going to keep on going. So he always recommends, if it's over $500 and you don't feel comfortable, make sure that you get a second opinion. Probably the one piece of advice that he gives constantly and consistently, and says this will make the biggest difference in the way your car runs, the biggest difference in how long your car lasts, and that is change your oil on time, every time. Now, he said, and depending on when you look at the owner's manual, keep in mind the owner's manual is written to kind of generically to a person who could live in any area, and the heat or the cold, I mean, the different elements of the area, the environment that you're driving in make a difference on how often and when you change your oil. So you want to keep that in mind. You're probably going to change it on a different schedule if you're in Texas versus if you're in California, as for instance. The next one is communication is critical to getting it right. And this is why, to me, it's so very important to have this relationship beforehand, before you have a problem, because the ability to communicate, and as Tony Joe has often said, it's just not the ability to communicate, it's the desire to have that conversation, for the mechanic to take the time to walk the customer through exactly what could be wrong, what he or she is going to do to fix it, and what they're looking for, how much time it's going to take. I mean, that could be a 5-10 minute conversation that the mechanic doesn't really have, but the mechanic values that. And there's just this open line of communication, and you feel comfortable as a customer putting your hands in the care of that mechanic, that you are going to be communicated to at all times. So critical to getting that right. If a huge red flag would be if a mechanic was not willing to take the time to talk to you and go through step by step what was going on, and be able to give you enough information to document the problem. So what I mean by that, and we'll talk a little bit more about this down when we get further down the list, but you don't want a mechanic simply fixing symptoms. You want him to find the problems and fix the problems, and that's something that happens quite often. Also, a fourth item is that you want a thorough cost analysis every step of the way. So what I mean by that, and maybe that sounds a little bit too much. What I mean by that is you want to know, okay, I'm going to drop my car off. We don't know what's wrong with it. It's probably going to take you a couple of hours to figure it out. What's that going to cost before we know what the estimate's going to be? And often this is something that most people don't do, and they don't take the time to find out what will the cost be in the event that you get in there and you find something and you think you're going to correct it. So you're hoping that the mechanic is taking their time. And again, quite frankly, I would rather pay a mechanic for their time so that we can get it right the first time. But very, very important to make sure that you know right up front when the clock starts ticking, when you're going to start paying for it, and get a written estimate. Tony Joe always talks about that. Get a written estimate of exactly everything that they're going to do, detail by detail. And once again, if you're working with somebody or you've just met somebody and this is a mechanic that's going to fix your car, then if they're unwilling to do that or if they're not very cooperative, that should be a sign in itself that you need to go someplace else. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. More car tips on the other side. We are up against a break. Stick around, and I'll be right back. Hello, this is Bob Brooks. Proverbs 22:3 and Proverbs 27:12 are the exact same verse word for word. I call them the stewardship verses of risk. A prudent person foresees danger and takes precautions. The simpleton goes blindly on and suffers the consequences. On the Prudent Money Radio Show, we teach about risk, how to identify it, how to figure it out, and what to do about it. We believe that to be a prudent steward, you have to be a good risk manager. Listen to the Prudent Money Radio Show on Bible School Radio 91.3. Prudent Money, home of the modern-day steward movement.
Dynamic, practical, life-changing.
There's no point in going to church and not letting the Christ who gave birth to the church on the day of Pentecost change your life.
Join us each day as Pastor Paul Shepherd applies the timeless truth of Scripture to everyday life. It's Destined for Victory on this great station.
Weekday afternoons at 3:30 here on Bible School Radio, KDKR.
Hi, I'm Jan Markell, host of Understanding the Times. We're very excited to be a part of Bible School Radio. I hope you will join me Saturday, 10 a.m., for cutting-edge guests and the latest information to help you discern the truth, even the inconvenient truth. We'll help you understand our times and contend for the faith. That's Understanding the Times, Saturday at 10 a.m., right here on Bible School Radio or anytime at olivetreeviews.org.
Welcome back. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to this special Car Corner edition of Prudent Money. Before I get back to automotive tips, and we're doing this because Tony Joe couldn't come in today, I still wanted to do the special Car Corner edition, so I wanted to talk about some of the things that Tony Joe has taught me through being on the radio with him for 20-plus years. Okay, let's get back to the tips. I thought, as I said a second ago, I thought I would take some time to talk about what Tony Joe has taught me through so many years of doing this program with it. The second one, or not the second one, the next one is, if you are doing a major repair job, fix other items while you're in the middle of it. The most expensive, for the most part, most of the time, the most expensive aspect of a repair bill is the cost of labor. So if you're doing a major repair to your car that they're having to remove a lot of things, take a lot of things out of the move parts and that type of thing to get down to the problem, to fix it, to replace a $10 part, consider what else could be around that part that needs to be fixed or could be replaced, because once again, they're already down there. You've already paid the labor for them to be down there in that part of the car. So you might as well replace items that normally go out. makes total sense. Now, the key is to make sure on the bill that they didn't double dip you on the labor. That's real key. The next one, and we talk about this a lot, you can't diagnose a problem with the check engine light by just looking at the check engine light. And this is what made some of these car repair shops that are all over the country. This is what they market. You know, if your engine light comes on, bring it in. We'll diagnose it on the spot. And Tony Joe says that the engine light the check engine light coming on is a symptom of a bigger problem. It tells you where to start. So once you get that information, then you start exploring. And he said it's just like being a detective. You see what the evidence is, and you try to locate and pinpoint the problem. And most of the time, it has nothing to do with the original reason why the check engine light was even on. So it's a matter of going in there and investigating and figuring out what really needs to be fixed versus just fixing the symptoms. It's just like if you go to the doctor and the doctor treats the cold symptoms but doesn't treat the cold, or treats probably not a cold, it's not a good example, but a sinus infection and doesn't treat the sinus infection itself, then you continue on as it takes a lot of time to get rid of that on the sinus infection on its own, versus treating the sinus infection and then the symptoms somewhat clear up. That was a rough way of explaining it, but I think that you got the idea. Through the years, we've talked a lot about buying cars, what to look for, what the process to go through. And this is really one of the two big reasons why we do the Car Corner Edition. First of all, cars throughout your lifetime are going to be a major expense. And the second thing is you've got to be able to have a little bit of an understanding of what you're looking for so that you know that you can understand what is being told to you about what's wrong with your car. And I talk about this with financial advising all the time, is that it's so very important that you get enough of an education on how money works so that you can understand and interpret what you're being told and what you're seeing so that you can come to good decisions. The next one is under that heading of buying a car, check the history of a car before buying. This is so very important. You never want to buy a car without looking at what's called the Carfax. The Carfax will tell you everything history-wise about that car. There's some things that don't always make it to the Carfax, but for the most part, you're going to be able to get a good idea of if this car's been in wrecks or if there's been any other questionable things that would keep you from buying the car to begin with. Don't shy away from high mileage cars. Tony Joe says that cars are built to drive a lot of miles. So if you come across a car that's a couple years old that has 100 to 120,000 miles on it, don't shy away. Now, what's good about that is that that high mileage aspect of the car is built into the price already, so the price should be a lot lower than a car with normal wear and tear on it. But if they've taken care of the car, done the services and the maintenance on it, it should last for a very long time. So that discount that you're getting, make sure that you are getting a really good discount, could pay off in the long haul, because for a dealership, the high mileage cars are not as easy to sell. The next one is, if you're buying a car, always have it checked out by a mechanic. That's huge. You never want, and of course, a mechanic that you trust is going to say, yeah, this is a problem, but it's not something I would worry about. It's something that you can fix if it gets worse. But get another set of eyes on that car and make sure that nothing is going to shock you and be a big surprise. Don't shy away from lightly damaged cars. One of the things I learned from Tony Joe is that a car that's in a fender bender or a wreck could be that it's one of those tear-off pieces, as he calls it, a bumper that you rip off, but there's no damage underneath that, and you put a new bumper on. It's a pretty good example. So if it's just some body work, it may not be a big deal. No structural damage, no damage to the engine, no rebuilds of any parts or anything like that. You could be getting a really good deal, because once again, the dealer didn't pay as much for it when they took it in as trade-in or bought it at auction, and they're not going to price it that high because they know they need to get rid of it, but they're still getting a good deal on it as it is. The next one is, most of the time repair shops are less expensive than the dealership. And this is proven time and time again because dealerships they've got more costs, so their prices are higher. I was talking to somebody the other day, and she wanted the recommendation of who do I take my car to, because the needs a service on it. It was a Mercedes, so it was going to be expensive. And I think she got quoted $1,400 or $1,500 at a Mercedes dealership. She took it to the person that I know that has a repair shop, and they did the exact same work for $900. So just if you're cost conscious, you might want to know that. Nothing against dealerships; they're just more expensive most of the time. And but then again, some people only want to go to dealerships, which that is also something that is understandable as well. So just make sure that you go to somebody that you can trust. When you're changing the oil, back to changing the oil, we talked about how important that is earlier. Get the filter changed. And of course, if you take it in to get the oil changed, you're going to get the filter changed. They're going to do that. But if you're doing it yourself, make sure that you take and replace the filter, because the filter has quite a bit of old oil trapped in it that can get recirculated. So something else that you need to know. I wonder if this has ever happened to you. You go and get your oil changed. You pull up into the garage, park the car. You go inside. Come back out, you drive out of the garage, and you realize there's fresh oil on the ground. What Tony Joe says, take that car back to where you had the oil change, because they probably didn't tighten the plug and make sure that it was closing up to where oil would not drip out. He says that happens all the time. Also says, always check the windshield wiper fluid before going on a trip. Good thing to do. And this one, I don't think a lot of people think about this. This has happened to me before, where you buy a car, but you don't check the expense to drive it. Would you buy a car if you knew that brakes, and you're going to have to put new brakes on the car at some point, were going to be a $4,500 charge? Might make you think twice. Or you buy a car with certain types of tires on it, and you have to replace it and use certain types of tires. How expensive that could be. This is a big one. Look for cars with flood damage. And we've gone through entire programs talking about this. When you're going out and you're shopping for a pre-owned car, make sure that there's not any odd smells, any discolorations. Check the interior, because you might be looking at a car that has been in a flood. Of course, what ends up happening is off the coast, if there's a big storm or a situation where there's flooded cars, those cars get cleaned up to the point where that they can kind of pass the test and they get shipped this way. So make sure that you don't fall for that. Is there one car brand that outlasts the others? This is really interesting, because for so many years we would talk about that there were car brands that were better than other car brands. But now the way that they build cars, they're pretty much all equal to some extent. So there's really not one brand. And it also comes down to how you take care of the car. How do you know if your high mileage is worth getting fixed? This is where it's so very important to have a very trusted relationship with a mechanic, that you can take a car in. The car may have 300,000 or 400,000 miles on it, and you have to fix $4,000 worth of expenses, or you have to invest $4,000 into the car to get it running like it's supposed to. Do you do that, or do you just sell it and go buy another one? That's where it's so very important that you have a mechanic in your best interest. Obviously, for the best interest of the mechanic, it is, don't sell it, let me fix it for you, and then or but the best interest of the buyer, the driver might be, hey, probably it's time to get a new car. Check your battery. Get your battery checked every 3 years. This is extremely important because you never want to be in a situation where you get stalled and because the battery doesn't work. And then finally, this is one that's also very important. Check for recalls on your car. There's all types of situations where cars have recalls and very important safety recalls. You can go to recalls.gov and look up your VIN, put your VIN in, vehicle and identification number, and that'll get you a list of what could be there for your car. You can also call a dealership as well and get them to look it up. Well, I hope that you've enjoyed this. Like I said, I normally play a replay when Tony Joe's not here about that type of stuff. You know, there's a list of great advice that Tony Joe's given through the years, and I just want to compile that, so I hope that it's been something that can be worthwhile and helpful to you along the way. This is Bob Brooks. You got a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in, because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time, keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.